Okay. All right, we're good. We're recording. All right, so this is going to be our second workshop piece, and this is My Growing Girl. And I'm going to hopefully, Gahl showed you how to do marking up on a Word document with track changes. I am going to mark this one up by hand, and we'll kind of show you and hopefully I can like turn the camera onto it and we can get a little bit of a sense of how I mark up a document by hand. Again, it's my methodology. A lot of what I write is just going to be about drawing attention for when I read it over again. A lot of times when you're reading it out loud, you don't have time necessarily to write full inline comments like what Gahl showed you, the marginalia. You definitely don't have time. So what I often do is X's, circles, brackets, exclamation points, things like that, just to make sure that I'm kind of keeping track of the places that I feel like the poem is doing something interesting or needs work or whatever. So I'll show you that at the end.
Okay.
Or I can show you as I can show you as I mark up. Do you want me to do that, Gahl?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you could do the first read through, just aloud. When I do the second read through, you can mark up while you listen, and then they can see some of that happen.
Okay, excellent. I'll read it. Okay, and this is a little bit longer than the first piece.
Yeah, what I'm gonna do while she reads it, just so I can have it, so you guys can see for me. I'm not gonna do anything near what I did before, but I'm gonna do sort of what I would do in a workshop, which is I'm gonna underline or mark for myself while I'm reading what stands out, so that I'll remember to come back to that later. And that's just gonna be with highlighting. It's nothing special.
Perfect. Okay. My growing girl. My parents' room offered me a set of scales and a mirror full length. I'd creep in, break their skin, stand gingerly upon them and await my verdict. Dangle a foot off the edge, watch the little red arrow swing to the left, and in one swift motion, that foot fell to the floor, casualty of war. I gouged fistfuls of flesh to place in a basket of reeds at my feet. I came back every day, carved at my front like it was a joint for Sunday, and slithers of fat fell to the ground, running red. I was a butcher, a surgeon. I breathed through the pain, stitched myself up, bleached floorboards, popped to the shops to contort myself in changing room mirrors, try on a size small. KO'd 9 times out of 10, I brought a cleaver to my hamstring, barely 5 feet tall. Once I met my mother in the street, and before we could embrace, a snarl ran its fingers down my spine, slapped me hard, the word fat and my family name, a jeer in crowded daylight. We knew the voice, and my mother, his teacher, pulled me away, hot with shame, used to it. Her arm came away in my hand, and I gnawed off my tongue. When I was still rolling up my skirt, I asked out a boy, and he weighed up the pros and cons of dating a fat girl with his mates. Not as fit, but apparently they're so much more grateful. He went out with my friend instead, and my hard stare wore her thinner, thinner, thinner. She told me he was such a bad kisser, and that night I performed open heart surgery from my bed, bloodied the sheets, cut myself in half to see if my shirts didn't gape. I threw my left aorta to the morning birds. Not good enough, so held in the hands of Christ a set of industrial scales. Our names were called and we knelt to confess our sins, birthdays, promotions, christenings, funerals, Christmas. We harmonized sweet, sickly, sticky fingers clasped in front of our mouths, cream cheese frosting, crystallized pineapple, carbonara with real parmigiana, olive oil dressing, fresh baked sourdough, crumbling flapjacks, syrup pudding and fresh cream, pork belly and whole roasted apples, crispy potatoes, tender stem broccoli, hollandaise, juicy burgers, pulled pork, and butter. My God, someone confessed to eating real salted butter slathered thickly on a warm roll. We renounced corner shop milk and honey, shiny purple wrappers like jewels in a crown. We counted our sins on our fingers and took our retribution, 1, 2, 3 pounds on. A cross in my holy book, I turned my jawbone over in my fingers and poked at the flesh that dared wobble when I shook it. My mother lost a quarter of herself and I lost some, felt good about it. People stopped me, approved, appraised, an eyebrow raised. About time. When I gained a bit back, a smidge, a heavy smudge, my check mark faded, and I skulked away to amputate my thighs, to hack at my back. I left school, and the same boy from before told me my pictures turned him on, that he wanted me. Please, come on. He told me not to tell anyone. Our secret. I snuck to his house, and he spat me back out when he was done, and I, alone, walked the mile or so back, my lips stuck in his teeth like yesterday's dinner. One of my breasts and all my fingers had rolled under his bed, streaking the floor red. Anorexia's true daughter said that taking the pill makes you balloon to burst, turns you into a wally person, a wallowing hippo. She wouldn't eat for days, and I fed her strawberries, poured my blood into her mouth so she would have strength. They breathe my air, and they confess to me their nightmares. They tell me they can think of nothing worse than looking like me. My dad always said, "You're a growing girl," and my mother would roll her eyes because we all knew I was growing out, not up. Dad says, "Shivering burns calories, so my window stayed open at night, my teeth craving a chattering song, and I watched my outer casing float through the window like a leaf on the wind. My hacked to bits body lay on a slab, rotting away, wasting the day." Okay.
Excellent.
And turn the camera on. Sorry if that reading was a bit. I think it's all right. Well, anyway.
Muscular language. Wow.
I flip it. Yeah. Okay. Can you see that? Wait, hold on. How do I make this one larger? Gahl, do you want to stop sharing your screen so that they can see my page more easily?
Yeah. 1 second. How do I do this? Is that better?
I still see your screen, but I don't see your face.
Oh. Okay.
So whichever the other one is. Better. Great. Perfect. Now I think I can turn it around and I'll see the full. Yeah. Okay, awesome. I've got my lamp on, but hopefully. All right. Oops. So maybe you can see closely how I'm marking this up. Oh, that's sideways. Okay.
Got your pen ready?
Yep, right here.
Okay, so I'll read through. Do you want me to stop when, like, do you want to stop me when you think of a thing you want to put on, or just have me read through it and you'll go as you go?
Just do it. This is how we do it in real life, so.
Fair. Good.
Oh, wait, sorry. What did you mean? Say that again.
No, then that makes sense. I'll read through it. You can can mark it up as I go.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. My growing girl. My parents offered me a set of scales and a mirror, full length. I'd creep in, break their skin, stand gingerly upon them and await my verdict. Dangle a foot off the edge. Watch the little red arrow swing to the left, and in one swift motion, that foot fell to the floor. A casualty of war. I gouged fistfuls of flesh to place in a basket of reeds at my feet. I came back every day, carved at my front like it was a joint for Sunday, and slithers of fat fell to the ground, running red. I was a butcher, a surgeon. I breathed through the pain, stitched myself up, bleached floorboards, popped to the shops to contort myself in changing room mirrors, try on a size small. KO'd 9 times out of 10, I brought a cleaver to my hamstring, barely 5 feet tall. Once, I met my mother in the street, and, before we could embrace, a snarl ran its fingers down my spine, slapped me hard. The word fat, my family name, a jeer in crowded daylight. We knew the voice, and my mother, his teacher, pulled me away, hot with shame, used to it. Her arm came away in my hand, and I gnawed off my tongue. When I was still rolling up my skirt, I asked out a boy, and he weighed up the pros and cons of dating a fat girl with his mates. Not as fit, but apparently they're so much more grateful. He went out with my friend instead, and my hard stare wore her thinner, thinner, thinner. She told me he was such a bad kisser, and that night I performed open heart surgery from my bed, bloodied the sheets, cut myself in half to see if my shirts didn't gape. I threw my left aorta to the morning birds. Not good enough, so held in the hands of Christ a set of industrial scales. Our names were called, and we knelt to confess our sins, birthdays, promotions, christenings, funerals, Christmas. We harmonized, sweet, sickly, sticky fingers clasped in front of our mouths, cream cheese frosting, crystallized pineapple, carbonara with real Parmigiano, olive oil dressing, fresh baked sourdough, crumbling flapjacks, syrup pudding and fresh cream, pork belly and whole roasted apples, crispy potatoes, tender stem broccoli, hollandaise, juicy burgers, pulled pork, and butter. My God, someone confessed to eating real salted butter slathered thickly on a warm roll. We renounced corner shop milk and honey, shiny purple wrappers like jewels in a crown. We counted our sins on our fingers and took our retribution. 1, 2, 3 pounds on. Across, in my holy book, I turned my jawbone over in my fingers and poked at the flesh that dared wobble when I shook it. My mother lost a quarter of herself, and I lost some. Felt good about it. People stopped me, approved, appraised, an eyebrow raised. About time. When I gained a bit back, a smidge, a heavy smudge, my check mark faded and I skulked away to amputate my thighs, to hack at my back. I left school and the same boy from before told me my pictures turned him on and that he wanted me. Please, come on. He told me not to tell anyone. Our secret. I snuck to his house and he spat me back out when he was done. And alone, I walked the mile or so back, my lips stuck in his teeth like yesterday's dinner. One of my breasts and all of my fingers had rolled under his bed, streaking the floor red. Anorexia's true daughter said that taking the pill makes you balloon to burst, turns you into a Wall-E person, a wallowing hippo. She wouldn't eat for days, and I fed her strawberries, poured my blood into her mouth so she would have strength. They breathe my air, and they confess to me their nightmares. They tell me they can think of nothing worse than looking like me. My dad always said, "You're a growing girl." And my mother would roll her eyes because we all knew I was growing out, not up. Dad says shivering burns calories, so my window stayed open at night, my teeth craving a chattering song. And I watched my outer casing float through the window like a leaf on the wind. My hacked to bits body lay on a slab, rotting away, wasting the day.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to take you on a tour then of my notes because I'm realizing as I'm writing it, I'm not super aware of what you can see. So right here with the title, I'm writing why, especially because it's got this question mark, which means that the writer may not be sure about this being the right title. Parents, that's just because there's there needs to be an apostrophe or something like that. I've noted certain points where there's rhymes, like floor, a casualty of war. And then there's a few moments where I felt like the language maybe got a little bit cliche, like my verdict, contort myself in changing room mirrors. I felt like maybe I'd heard that before a little bit. There's this moment where it says barely 5 feet tall. I assume that was talking about time or like the age of the speaker, but it was sort of like a slightly random comment in terms of the syntax. There's parts where I point out some good line breaks. So like slap me hard, the word, and then it breaks and then it goes fat here. I thought that was really lovely. And then certain parts where I just wrote good or put some check marks. I really like this other break. There's some really lovely line breaks in here. My hard stare wore her thinner, and I thought that was really good. And then there's certain parts where I put them in brackets because I felt like they were kind of these little asides, or I'm not sure how they related to the rest of the piece, like this little not good enough so, or this part, her arm came away in my hand and I gnawed off my tongue. I felt like it does relate to the scene, but it has such a different voice. So I kind of put it in those brackets to point that out. And I wrote, wow, what a list. Really long, list of food. We're really, doing a lot of food today. It's making me very hungry.
It's delicious food too.
Delicious. I know. Yeah. I was like, I can like, and also it's like really well described. I think we'll talk about this later, but like it's so well described, I think, and in such detail that I didn't get sick of the list, even though it's very long. And then again, I liked this whole bit, so I put a little exclamation point here. I crossed out this word and. Normally, if I don't want something, I'll cross it out, but that was the only thing that was sticking out to me at this moment. This is another rhyme. I like this rhyme. The first rhyme I didn't like so much, but this one is great. I like to hack at my back. And then in this bit where it said anorexia's true daughter, I just wrote who. And then at the end, again, another really good line break. They tell me they can think of nothing worse than looking like me. I thought that was lovely.
I don't know if I find it lovely, but I think it is really well written.
Yeah. It's a good line break. I think it's great because it has so much to do with the dynamics of sight, which is exactly what we're dealing with, like looking and being looked at. And then we have looking and then like me, and it's almost as if it's breaking her away from them as well. Like they don't want to be like her, and so there's this break there between them and like me. I just love it. And then the ending, I thought it was really real and raw and great. Okay, so let's talk about the piece as a whole.
Okay.
And you can bring up your screen again, and I can stop showing my exaggeratedly large face right now. Oh, actually, okay.
Yeah, one moment. There we go. Okay.
Maybe it's a little easier to see it on the screen then. Okay.
There's a more clear there.
But I'll be consulting my my notes here.
Yeah, so first things we like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of moments that they're really powerful, or that like I felt like they're like, ooh. And that's what was basically me going crazy with the highlighter, hither and yon. All of those lines were good, but there's such an embarrassment of riches here that it's kind of
Hold on, sorry.
Know what to single out. Yeah.
Screen, I can't see anything.
Oh, and the highlighting is not clear here.
Oh, I can't even see. I can see neither you nor screen. I'm just seeing my own face.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
I love.
Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, we can see the screen now.
Yeah. So when I went through it, I started trying to highlight, but this is a particular situation. I think I may have mentioned this before in the previous classes, but I'm going to mention it now. In beginning writing workshops, you tend to have two types of writers. There's the writers that like underwrite and the writers that overwrite. And this is an overwritten poem, but that's a good thing. That means there's so much good writing here that like, even though I was highlighting as fast as I could, I didn't get half of the things that I thought were like really dope and amazing. And like we're at the point where if I'm making decisions in the future about what to cut, I'm not cutting something out because the language falls flat. It's really more a question of functionality. But there's so much good here. Food's delicious. All of the language is really muscular when we're, and I mean that metaphorically, but of course we are talking a lot about the actual anatomy of the body being splayed out. And like, this is where the specific choices really take a lot of power. When we talk about using a cleaver to the hamstring, right? It's not like a surgical scalpel or just like a generic knife. It's specifically this instrument of butchery, or how it's fistfuls of flesh, not pounds of flesh. There's just ways where, yeah.
I highlighted slithers of fat. I thought that was amazing. That we get this.
I mean, I think this is a really, really strong voice going on here all throughout. And visually, I think it's also really well organized. And this is a lot of stuff that you were talking about before and that we mentioned in the previous poem, where we see some of the things being sort of indented out to give them that little extra emphasis or to separate them visually from the poem. And I think that's working tremendously well.
One thing I might offer is to consider it all the way, put a hard border on it on the far right. If you that sounds so like Boris Johnson, Theresa May, but just to be aware of you've got a really nice left justification to also kind of make sure that it's kind of in line on the right end as well. Which you can do by sort of tweaking the margin slightly. It's a really minor comment, but just in terms of how it looks on the page, it might look a little even more kind of nice if you can figure out how to things to line.
There is one convention in most, I guess, Western poetry where if we have a line that we want to wrap around, we'll indent the second line underneath to indicate that. So if, for example, I'm guessing that this needs to be done here, But if we wanted to indicate that this was one incredibly long poetic line in this list of foods, we could say we harmonize sweet sticky figures after cream cheese. You would literally just indent. Oops, sorry, Microsoft Word's a pain in the ass. So line break, indent.
Yeah, perfect.
And that the implication would be that everything that comes after is part of the initial line we harmonized, just continuing on and on and on and on.
And I think that gives it something too, in terms of our ability to organize it as one chunk, as it were.
Yeah. I'm not making this as a hard suggestion, and I'm showing this as an example because right now we're still focusing on the things we love, and there's so much to love here. Like, it's just, oh, I'm sorry. I feel like I can't stop making really bad puns, but it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet of words. It's
literally, quite literally, yeah, at certain points. But yeah, no, there's a lot there. And I think it's also great if you see that, multiple readers have highlighted the same thing. And I think Gahl and I have highlighted some similar things.
Yeah.
That really shows the strength of those particular points. I think we both definitely highlighted this. I threw my left aorta to the morning birds and so on, and my hard stare wore her thinner, 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 and stuff like that. And the my God, someone confessed to eating real salted butter, and some of those moments are really exciting.
Yeah. Should we go into questions?
Yeah, let's go into questions. I had a question about the family dynamic, because we start with the family. The title is to do with the family. It's in the voice of the father, right? The first 3 words are my parents' room. And in the end, we also get this part with the dad and the mom. I felt like there was a little more there in almost like the storyline of the poem. I really, really thought this part about this encounter in the street, the word fat and my family name, a jeer in crowded daylight. We knew the voice, and my mother, his teacher, pulled me away, hot with shame, used to it. I thought that was amazing. And I felt like maybe there's more there within the poem to kind of highlight the family dynamics. Particularly when it was like held in the hands of Christ, a set of industrial scales, our names were called.
Yeah, who's the hour
feel
there?
That's the family potentially, but I want to know that the writer knows, who that is.
I mean, I'm authentically curious because it does seem for a second like it might be a fat camp.
Oh, interesting. Or like one of those reality shows or something. Yeah.
No, I don't mean a reality show. I mean like a camp that fat children are sent to shape up, or potentially of like an eating disorder clinic, because we have this sort of reference to an anorexia person later.
Yeah,
it's true. It seems there's a cohort with a particular impression of food that the speaker is belonging to in this poem.
Yeah. I thought too about, the industrial scales I thought was a really good, like the fact that it's an industrial scale is like quite intense. So I did think about that reality show, The Biggest Loser or whatever, where they weigh them on a cattle scale or whatever. Roxane Gay writes about it in her book Hunger, and kind of how abusive that show is, and some of the ways that they're humiliated and so on. And I think it's really interesting the way she writes about it. I thought it was very evocative. Yeah, I thought this moment, anorexia's true daughter, I was like, I want to know who this really is, not somebody who's, that's just a way of saying that someone's very anorexic, I guess. But I just wanted something more about who this person really is, and also something that defines them that isn't just the eating disorder, right? That there's, maybe there's some little thing about them that stands outside of that.
Right, or even if we don't want to get into that much detail, I do want to know, who is this person to the speaker? Are they a relative? Are they a friend? Are they a teacher?
A sister? Yeah, who is it?
What's the power dynamic between those two?
Exactly.
Because that's going to have a big impact on what it means. Yeah. Other things that I was kind of curious about, I'm going to jump into my questions because I felt like you were already transitioning into later stuff.
Yeah.
I did want to know, we have a lot of metaphorical connections to Christ and to Christianity. I'm wondering if this is supposed to be part of the explicit content of the poem. Are we referencing something in either the church community or in religious structures that are expressing specific beliefs about body and body image? Because it's very clear that that body image is being expressed through her social circle in terms of the friends and the dating life. We don't have any identified characters that I can tell, like a pastor or a congregation, besides the those who quote unquote confess. So I don't know if this is an entirely metaphorical church group or if there actually is a literal church that the speaker is referring to that may or may not be tying into the narrative here. And I want to know about that.
I want to know about this violent metaphor as well that goes on throughout the poem. I like it. I also want to know, I understand it to be entirely fictional, but
Yeah.
there's something about these images of self-harm that kind of goes throughout the poem that ends in like an image of fully like dead body, my hacked to bits body lay on a slab, rotting away, wasting the day. I just feel like there's something about how that relates to the more literal parts of the poem that I want to feel like I understand that connection a bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to translate that into layman's terms, which is that, like, I know this is code for some behavior, but I want to know what behavior. Is this dieting? Is this purging? Is this just self-hatred? Like, is this cutting? Like, what are you actually doing when you're metaphorically cutting off parts of your body?
And is it just like, yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to get into actual suggestions, the even better ifs?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
I think it could use like one good hard kind of go through to kind of pick which moments, which images, and maybe some of the other ones need a little more work. Like this some of the questions about timing and development. Sometimes there's these little things like barely 5 feet tall, where I'm not entirely sure it's needed at all.
Okay.
I like the precision of figuring out what like what stage she's at in a growth process, but I wonder if we're already getting that from these interactions with the boy. Especially given that it's the same boy as before, and we're already getting a lot of that from the. So my mother supported herself. I lost some. Felt good about it. People stopped me when I gave it back, etc. So we're already getting like a lot of that temporality.
Yeah, I was on the same page about signposting the age a little bit more clearly, so we know where the poem starts and where it finishes.
Exactly. I think there's a sort of, it's being a little coy with that right now, and I think that's not necessary. Like there needs to either be kind of a, upfrontness about that, about whether the age is important at different points.
I mean, I think it's definitely important because if we're going to be looking at it through the lens of a daughter in relationship to her parents, the amount of influence they have is going to be very different when she's 8 years old from when she's 18, fundamentally. And so, like, just to let us know how much the parents are able to hold sway over, it's really important that we know when it occurs, and how much their opinion actually matters. I have a suggestion that I think you're probably going to not agree with because it's super extreme, but I do think so. I think we should dispense entirely with the metaphor of cutting the parts of the body off.
I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, like it's not because I don't think it's good. I think it's an amazing language. I think it does what it's supposed to, and it does it beautifully. However, for me, the time that we employ extended metaphors like that and heighten the language is when the narrative itself is not evocative enough on its own, or not extreme enough on its own for the reader to be able to understand what the stakes are. I would use a big metaphor like that if I was trying to describe an emotional pain that people cannot immediately connect to. But like in this case, we're talking about a physical body and a physical transformation, and we all have bodies and we all experience that. And some of the things that she's describing are so socially painful immediately, so raw that like I don't need a metaphor to tell me how much it hurts to be called fat in public while your mom is holding you. Like that's fucking terrible. And like the moment that you hear that line, it already like hits you like a ton of bricks. And I know several times like the idea of how there's so much more grateful. Like the language in that is so patently disgusting that like I don't need to know that you performed open heart surgery for my bed. I'm doing it to myself just listening to it now. Like it's fucking.
I think that, yeah. I agree. I think that even if you want to keep some of that in, or if you want to keep that metaphor in, which I think is also like, I mean, again, like a lot of the language is so visceral and so strong that it's like, I feel like, you might want to keep it in. It would be good to do a draft without any of it and see what you really need. Because I do agree, like this moment about we knew the voice and my mother, his teacher, pulled me away, hot with shame, used to it, is so intense.
Yeah.
That then we have, what I wrote here. Let's see if I can flip my camera again. You probably can't see this. But at any rate, I'll sort of zoom in. I had her arm came away in my hand and I gnawed off my tongue. I put that in parentheses there because I thought, it's not needed, or it's sort of like an aside. You can already feel the shame in that moment and how horrible it is. And we knew the voice, and like, and used to it as well. So the idea of the mom's like body parts kind of falling off, I think, isn't actually needed in that moment for sure.
Yeah, and I think it might be fun. I mean, not fun, but I think it might be interesting or evocative to do a draft in which you even keep the space because the thing is, this poem is a little bit cramped visually. So what we could do is we could. I'm gonna look at I guess my screen for the second.
Turn
Take
the text wide.
lines, but leave the line break, so we still have this big blank spot after used to it. So the reader still has to visually take a second and just sit with that shame before they get to move on to the next thing. And if we did that with every time where it's like, instead of KO 9 times out of 10, which I'm not totally sure what it means, or the cleaver with the hamstring, just, contort myself and changing our mirrors, trying to size small.
It's almost like performing an erasure of your own poem, like or a blackout poem of your own poem.
Yeah, well, I don't think of it as a blackout. I'm thinking of it as actually just leaving the reader to fester in that area until they migrate themselves to the next episode within the overarching story. Because there's a lot of sort of self-contained moments that are happening that are being sequenced in this poem to work wise, and then we have this like connective tissue of the metaphor that happens in between those moments. But I don't think we need that connective tissue. I think there's already a unity here, either by chronological order, because I'm assuming one, even if there isn't.
There is. We can feel the chronological order, I think.
Yeah, both by chronological order and theme. So we don't actually need the extended metaphor in order for it all to fit into a cohesive whole. And I would like to have that space to then sort of mentally organize each of these discrete episodes, because it'll help me get a sense of if it makes sense, like the frequency.
What's actually, yeah.
Scale. Yeah. But that's my extreme suggestion. And it is not a metaphor. I think metaphoric language is so well done. That's it has nothing to do with the fact that like it's actually beautiful and great. It's just like, I think for what the poem is accomplishing, it might be extraneous.
I think that's a really interesting and ambitious suggestion. And I think that it's the kind of thing that even if you decide, no, I need some of this in here to kind of give that visceral nature to the poem, you can benefit from doing this in editing. Seeing what you can do with less is always really valuable. So, and any ambitious edit that you can do to kind of restructure a piece of writing shows you and teaches you a lot about that piece of writing. Let's stop here unless you have any final comments, Gahl, because we're getting into kind of like 5 minutes. Okay, cool. We'll stop this recording and then we'll do another poem.